There's strong interest in a number of developments today. So before I hand over to Dr. Bloomfield to do the update on today's numbers and the Korean citizen case that I know there's interest in, I do want to run through a few of the other issues which I know that you will also want to ask about. So first, testing in the community. As you know, we've been working over the last few weeks to get those testing numbers up. The testing numbers in the community are still not at the level that we are aiming for, and we do need more to be done in that area. So while we've issued new guidance to GPs and we're continuing our focus on testing at the border and in isolation and quarantine facilities, we're still not seeing the numbers overall that we want to see. So one of the issues that we are facing, and let's be frank about this, is that people are reluctant to be tested. And that is something that we all need to play our part in. In order to stay on top of COVID-19, to make sure that we don't have any community transmission, my message to all New Zealanders is if you're offered a test, you should take the test. If you are asked to be tested, you should take the test. This is part of our obligations collectively as part of the team of 5 million that we all need to be playing our part in making sure that we're keeping our testing numbers up and that we're identifying any risk of COVID-19 in the community as quickly as possible before it starts to take hold. The survey by the College of GPs that Dr. Bloomfield went through earlier in the week is showing that GPs are experiencing a similar phenomenon. I don't want to be critical of the New Zealand public here, but I am issuing an appeal to the public that we've all got to continue to stay on guard and play our part. So our ongoing testing and contact tracing regime is one of our best lines of defence against COVID-19 and keeping the openness and the freedom that we have all come to enjoy, which is setting us apart from much of the rest of the world. Someone refusing a test could be the difference between identifying a train of transmission or it going undetected in our community until it's too late. So if you're offered a test, once again, please take the test. If your GP or your doctor asks you to get tested, then please say yes to that. So far we've had 460,000 tests taken in New Zealand. That means somewhere around, there'll be a little bit of double up in there, but that means somewhere around 9% of New Zealanders have had that test. That is a pretty significant proportion of the population, and I want to thank all of those New Zealanders who have done their bit by doing that. But the outbreak in Victoria shows us now is not the time to be complacent. More than ever, we need Kiwis to get tested when they're asked to do that. A brief update on the COVID Tracer app. We've now got 621,400 registered users. There have been 82,287 posters created and placed. And to date, the number of scans is 1,604,609. Today, the latest update has been released. I have downloaded it onto my phone. I can confirm that it is working. The update allows users to manually add in their extra appointments, and I encourage everybody who is using the app to make sure they are updating it, and those who are not using it to download it and to start using it. The ability to load in appointments retrospectively and to manually enter appointments where there is no QR code in place is one of the most common requests that we've had of the app, and that issue has now been fixed. So please download the report. Finally, before I hand over to Dr. Bloomfield, this morning Michael Herring QC issued his report into the investigation of the leaking of patient details. The report is very clear in its findings. It sheets the responsibilities firmly home to Michelle Bogue and to Hamish Walker. This was a disgraceful and grubby act carried out by two National Party members for political purposes. They gave no thought to the stress and harm they may have caused to the individuals as they hatched their plan to gain political advantage. The report is also clear that the Ministry's processes could have been tighter, and they have now done that, and the risk of further leaks of that information has been removed. Casting our minds back, the Ministry did take precautions and had processes in place to safeguard the information. Those processes were motivated by the need to protect frontline health workers. They were drawn up and put in place in speed at a very unprecedented time. The report finds they could have moved more quickly to narrow the distribution list and to be extra safe with that information when community transmission was contained. But I want to be absolutely clear here. The system, like all systems, relied upon the integrity of all of the organisations who received that sensitive information. All of those health organisations and professionals acted as New Zealanders would expect, all except for one. Mr Heron makes it very clear that no system can completely prevent such deliberate acts by malevolently motivated individuals. Mr Heron also has strong words and actions or non-actions, on the actions or non-actions of the then health spokesperson Michael Woodhouse, and I encourage him to take those thoughts into consideration. So again, I would like to reiterate my own thanks to all of the media outlets who received that sensitive information and the responsible way that they handled it. I'll now hand over to Dr Bloomfield for today's update, and then we'll take your questions.
Thank you, Minister. Kia ora koutou katoa. So today there is one new case of COVID-19 which is in managed isolation. It's been now 90 days since the last case of COVID-19 was identified that had been acquired locally where there was an unknown source. Today's case is a woman in her 20s. She arrived in New Zealand from Ireland via Dubai on the 24th of July. Her positive result was from the testing at around day 3 at the Ridges facility in Rotorua. She's now been transferred to Auckland to the quarantine facility there. There are no additional recovered cases today, so our total number of active cases is now 24. None of our active cases are receiving hospital level care. Our total confirmed cases now sits at 1,210, and yesterday our laboratories completed 2,523 tests, of which the vast majority, 2,226, were in the community and the balance were in managed isolation and quarantine facilities. So we have seen over the last 7 to 10 days an increase in the community testing, and whilst the number hasn't gone up into the 3,000 or 4,000s, that's partly because we have lower numbers of people in our managed isolation quarantine facilities. A few comments from myself on the report from Michael Heron QC. I do first of all want to acknowledge the 18 people who were affected by this privacy breach. The Ministry has been in contact with them all to apologise, 17 of whom we spoke to personally and the other contacted electronically at this stage, and to keep them informed about what is happening. I want to update you on the actions the Ministry is taking in response to the breach. The immediate action was to stop sending the information that had been being sent on a daily basis to a group of organisations as it had been sent right from early on in the pandemic to support their operational activity and keep their people safe. We stopped sending that information given that under the circumstances where currently all our cases are in managed isolation and quarantine, we don't feel that those organisations need to receive it. At the same time, we have reviewed the list of organisations and people who would receive the information should it be required again in future, and to ensure there is a clear reason for them to receive it. I should say that there was already a clear policy in place and the information was being shared in line with that. Should personal information be required by any external parties in the near term, then we will ensure that there is a very clear reason and arrangement for sharing that information with good protection of it. We have also issued a breach of contract notice to the Auckland Rescue Helicopter Trust in line with our legal obligations under the contract with them. And finally on that, I want to say that every day we have people who work in the health sector who have access to New Zealanders' health information. I know for my own part that they take that responsibility incredibly seriously, and I want to thank them for the work they do every day to ensure the privacy of New Zealanders. Just an update on the COVID case that has been reported from South Korea. We too continue to receive and analyse information about the person who recently tested positive on arrival in South Korea. There is still no evidence from all of our follow-up activities and our ongoing testing in the community that there is community transmission in New Zealand. So we do consider the public health risk low, and all the testing we have done domestically, including of the close contacts and of others who are casual contacts, has returned negative results. And further contact tracing, as we get more information about the individual's movements when they were here in New Zealand over the few weeks before they left, we are doing further contact tracing, and we're indicated offering or undertaking testing. We did receive the result of the second PCR test from Korean authorities overnight. That result was positive. Now, right from the start, we have been considering 4 possibilities for this case. First of all, it may have been a false positive result. That's now been ruled out. The second is that it may have been an old infection that has returned a positive result, and we have seen those here before, and they have been widely described internationally. The third is that the case acquired their infection during their travel from New Zealand to South Korea, in particular during quite a lengthy transit period in Singapore. And the fourth is, of course, that the case may have acquired the infection more recently in New Zealand, and the latter is the one we are working to rule out. So we've done the close contact tracing of passengers on the domestic flight that took the person from Auckland to Christchurch before they flew out to Singapore. We know the person's movements on the ground in Christchurch, and there's been some media around some of the businesses that were visited, and they have been greatly cooperative and helpful in supporting contact tracing and any relevant testing there. We're looking at their wider movements as we get more information. We will continue to work on that. However, we also want to do some further surveillance in the 2 places where we know the person has been in the 3 weeks or so before they left New Zealand. That is in South Auckland, particularly around Manurewa, and also in Queenstown. So I am suggesting that anybody who has been in Queenstown from the 1st to the 4th of July, a very short period, and this was before the school holidays, but anyone who's been there who may have had or has symptoms or may be concerned, please do get a test. And likewise, if people in Manurewa have symptoms, you will be offered, you should seek advice and get a test, and others who may be concerned, please do reach out. And if you would like a test, that will of course be free. We will continue with the targeted surveillance and ongoing follow-up of any close contacts, and I do want to thank the person who is now back in South Korea and the people they stayed with here in New Zealand for their enormous cooperation and helpfulness in us being able to get on to this case. And again, just a reminder, anyone who has concern about symptoms, and those symptoms are respiratory symptoms largely, cough, runny nose, sore throat, difficulty breathing, and of course fever, then they should get advice from their general practitioner or health line. The number is 0800 358 5453. Thank you.
Happy to take questions.
Breach of contract notice. What are the possible consequences of that?
Well, at this point, we will issue the breach and we'll have a conversation with the provider. The main thing we will be looking for is an assurance from them that any information provided to that organisation, most of the information provided every day for their work is health information. So we'll just want assurance from them that their processes and procedures are in place to protect the privacy of that information provided.
Should the Ministry have been more careful with that data when it came to encryption of it or password protection?
So, of course, we were taking care in that we had a clear policy and we were working to that. I think one of the things that Michael Heron pointed out is that the transmission of the information via email could have been done more securely, and we will now, of course, if we are sharing that information with organisations who need it, we will ensure there is encryption of the information or that it's password secured.
Do you think it was correct for this information to go to a CEO instead of actual respondents? I mean, will there be more due diligence on the email accounts of the people that you're sending this information to, and if it's necessary to go to a CEO as opposed to an actual first responder?
Well, I think we do have to have confidence that chief executives who are running organisations that are trusted partners will handle any information that they receive sensitively. The Ministry of Health ultimately were following the guidance issued by the Trust as to who they wanted the information sent to. you're never going to have a system. If someone deliberately and maliciously wants to release information, no system can be 100% guarded against that. And I think that finding is very clear in the report. So it is worth remembering too, the system was set up at speed in order to keep people safe, during the early stages of COVID-19. The report's, clear that the ministry could have tightened up once we didn't have community transmission anymore, but the report is also clear that it was a very justified response in the environment that it was set up in.
Mr. Herald essentially took Michelle Bogue at her word that it was not sent on to anyone else other than Michael Woodhouse with similar information. Obviously, with an Inquiries Act question, it would be quite bad for her to lie to the inquiry in terms of legal ramifications, but do you think that's good enough to take her on her word on that, or would you have preferred for there to be kind of a forensic email investigation?
Look, as I said previously when I've been asked about this, we set out the terms of reference. I made my expectations clear, and it is really up to the person conducting the inquiry as to how they conduct the inquiry and what tools they use under the legislative mandate that they have through the State Services Commission. Michael Heron has found in his report that both Michelle Bogue, Michael Woodhouse and in fact Hamish Walker as well were very cooperative and shared with him all of the information that he felt he needed in order to be able to reach a finding. Of course, he did have other tools at his disposal had they not done so and had he felt that he needed to use those in order to get the information that he needed. Okay, one at a time.
Did you give him enough time to use all of those tools?
Yes, he had as much time as he needed. I certainly had no feedback that he needed more time in order to be able to complete the investigation.
So given that he's taken the word of people who, to your words, committed a disgraceful and grubby act, does that meet the expectations you set out for that inquiry?
Look, he's gotten to the bottom of it. He's found out how the information came to be released, which was what we ultimately wanted to do. He's identified improvements to the system that can be put in place to safeguard people's personal information. That's what we asked him to do, and he has done that. So in terms of fulfilling the terms of reference, I believe that he's done that.
Would you like to see further consequences for Michelle Bogue or Hamish Walker?
Look, they've paid a reasonably significant price already. Any further consequences for them are not within my jurisdiction or my brief. Obviously, the Privacy Commissioner has an ability to investigate. They fall outside of the purview of the State Services Commission.
The State Services Commission says when errors happen like this, it wants chief executives to learn from it, fix it, and so on and so forth. Have you learned from this, and how are you fixing it?
Yes, so the expectation, Peter Hughes makes this very clear, is to own it, fix it and learn from it. I've outlined the steps we've taken already to fix it, and also what we have done is we're getting an independent organisation to come in and actually look at all our COVID activity at the moment and just do a little bit of a review and audit to make sure that the way we are providing information externally is upholding privacy standards as they should be. So I think that's one of the learnings we've taken, is to look more widely as well.
Even what do you need an audit of the Health Ministry to look after health data?
It's not an audit of the Health Ministry. It's specifically looking at given that a lot of the COVID activity was set up and executed at pace, it's to make sure that we're just having an extra look to make sure that any information being shared is being shared in a safe way that protects people's privacy.
To what extent has that distribution list been narrowed?
Had it been narrowed?
What has it been narrowed to now?
Well, the distribution list now is zero, so no information's been shared. And as I said, we have reviewed it. I'll have to come back and just see whether, I think at the time there were 17 or 18 organisations, but I can give an update on the number of organisations that would be on that distribution list should we need to distribute it again in the same way.
Protections you're placing on this information going forward, if you were to send it out again, what are those?
So one of the first things we can do, and we will if we have to share information in the interim, will be to send it as a password protected file if we're sending it via email. But we are also looking at ways to transmit the information without having to use email, because the health system does have a number of other platforms in place where information can be shared securely, including in an encrypted format.
Patients in New Zealand that have been visited by this person who's now in South Korea prior to their leaving New Zealand, has the Ministry of Health activated the exposure notification feature in the NZ COVID Tracer app?
for the people who may have.
The person who is now in South Korea, he visited a countdown at a McDonald's in Christchurch, for example, and presumably other locations in Auckland.
I see. Can I check on that, and we'll include that in the release when that goes out, or we'll follow up with a subsequent piece of information on our website. That's a very good question.
Close contact testing for that case, how many close contacts have been tested?
How many have been tested? So just a quick run through. There were on the flight from Auckland to Christchurch, there were 10 close contacts, and all have been tested. 9 negative, 1 result pending. On the flight, there were 159 casual contacts. They're not automatically tested, but can be tested if they wish. Likewise, on the flight from Queenstown to Auckland, which is about the 4th of July, there were 6 close contacts. 5 of those have been tested. The 6th was contacted this morning and is being tested today. And in the community, there were 5 household contacts and 2 friends. All have been tested and returned negative results.
Bloomfield, would you trust the word of Michelle Bogue and Hamish Walker?
I've got nothing further to add from what the Minister's already said in response to that question.
Lisa, would you trust them?
Look, that's not ultimately a matter for me. I don't have to work with them.
Was it a matter for the inquiry to get to the bottom of the extent of the wrongdoing and the extent of the breach?
Look, it was a matter for the inquiry. I mean, I think the terms of reference are very clear, which was how did the information come to be in the public domain? Did people have it who shouldn't have had it? Were there improvements to the systems and processes that were in place that needed to be made? I think the report has certainly fulfilled those terms of reference.
Is that a forensic accounting of Michelle Bogue and Hamish Walker and Michael Woodhouse's email accounts? Do you really feel like you're fully aware of just how far that information went?
Look, the inquiry has fulfilled the terms of reference that it had.
Weren't the terms of reference fulfilled on the day that Hamish Walker released a press release saying, I did it?
Well, I mean, one of the things that we wanted to get to the bottom of is whether there were systems and processes that needed to be improved. I think the report has actually done that. We did want to, just create a factual record of what had happened.
How much did the inquiry cost?
It's funded by the State Services Commission from within the funding that they have available to do these things. This particular price tag is one that you'd have to raise with the Commissioner or the Deputy Commissioner who's been releasing that today.
Darren was paid?
No, I don't have
You're confident that Michelle Bogue didn't send the information to anyone other than Hamish Walker or Michael Woodhouse?
That is what she has said.
This issue of people not declining to have tests when it's suggested, do you have any evidence on that other than this anecdotally, or is it just what you're kind of hearing from the sector?
It's what we're hearing from the sector. Certainly I've had that directly from people in the sector, but also the survey that the Director General went through on Tuesday showed that the survey of the GPs indicated that they were experiencing resistance.
Have you had a test, and if so, how did you like it?
I have not had a test, no.
No, I haven't had one either yet, so I'm pleased in that I've been well, but should it be offered, or indeed should I think there's a necessity, I won't hesitate to go and get one.
That's probably like a reason why they're not too keen to, with no community transmission, and the fact that people say it's quite uncomfortable. Is that why you think people are not wanting to take it up?
Look, I mean, I think people are to some extent feeling comfortable because of the position that New Zealand is in, and they don't necessarily see how important it is for us to keep our testing rates up. And so, I don't think there's any ill intent by New Zealanders here. I don't think New Zealanders aren't willing to take one for the team if they need to. I just think at the moment they perhaps don't accept that they need to. So my message to them is very, very clear. We need people to do their bit. We need people to take the test. If they're being offered a test, they're being offered it for a reason. Please do your bit and help us to make sure that we keep COVID-19 out.
You're shifting the responsibility of the testing to the public through this, but do you take any responsibility that changing the case definition 2-3 times over a number of weeks was confusing and it misled the public as to who should get a test when?
No, I don't necessarily accept that now. I mean, I think that uncertainty probably hasn't helped, but I think that, for several weeks now, the guidance has been very, very clear, and we're not seeing those numbers coming back up to the level that we need them to be at. We're working very hard to make sure that all those involved in the testing decision-making process are very, very clear that we want to see the numbers coming back up again. They are very clear about that. I am concerned that people are turning down tests. I'm not putting all of the blame back on the public for this. We're doing our bit as well. We all have to accept responsibility for getting the testing rate back up.
Do you know that there are 4,000 people a day showing up to be tested though?
I don't have a number. We don't record the number of people who are being offered a test. There are the surveys, which again the Director General went through earlier in the week, that give us an indication of the number who are turning them down. We record the number of tests we do every day. Obviously, we don't record the number that are being. GPs are not required to report the number that they offer that are turned down.
The problem with the GP system in general, that this is essentially a collection of small businesses who might not have it in their interest to greatly encourage a test in a way that a DHB might.
No, I don't think that's necessarily the case. I mean, GP practices are paid for each test that they administer, and I've not seen any suggestion that that's a problem.
Could I just add to that, Minister? Certainly this was something that the survey specifically asked of the GPs, and around 800 responded. Were they willing and able? Did they have what they needed? Yes. The vast majority did have what they needed. They knew what the expectation was, and they had the resources. There were a few things that they suggested that would help: clarity around the payment, timely payment, ensuring that they had good access to PPE and so on, which wasn't identified as a problem by anybody at this point. So we'll make sure those things are in place. But I think that the GPs I've spoken with are all absolutely committed and clear about what their role is.
All right, we're both on a reasonably tight time frame, so we have two last questions. Jenna?
Do you think that Hamish Walker should come back to Parliament and front up about his disgraceful and grubby act?
That's a matter for the National Party.
Question for Auckland. Health recruiters are reporting a surge in health workers wanting to work here. Why do you think this is, and why does New Zealand continue to have skills shortages in so many areas: psychiatry, nursing, mental health, physiotherapy?
I'm not quite sure what the question there is. Is this workers from overseas who are keen to come and work in New Zealand?
Yeah, why do you think that is?
Oh, look, I think not just in health, but I think across the board there's a lot of people who look at New Zealand right now and think New Zealand's a pretty good place to be relative to the chaos that we're seeing around the rest of the world. New Zealand is doing incredibly well. My message to all Kiwis, of course, is we've got to remain vigilant, as I've said that every day that I've stood at this podium, and will continue to do so. But I can understand why people want to come to New Zealand. We are a great place to be right at the moment. Very last question.
So whose responsibility is it now to get to the bottom of how far this patient data leak went? For for these 18 people whose data was leaked, they have the right to know how far, who saw this information. So whose responsibility is it now, or is it just we have to believe these two people?
Look, I think we conducted the inquiry. We initiated the inquiry. The inquiry has reported back. As far as I'm concerned, that's the end of the matter for this particular incident. All right, you can be very last. That's a bit cheeky to go on there.
With a breach of contract clause, typically there's a penalty associated with that embedded in the contract. What's the penalty?
I don't know what the penalty is, and it may be that, this isn't an exercise in trying to penalise someone. It's an exercise in ensuring that the organisation's systems are protecting private information. So that's the conversation we'll be having with them. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, everybody.